All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a concept, well, it's kind of slippery, but really important for understanding, ourselves and society, alienation.
It is, yeah.
It's that feeling, when you're separated from something, maybe yourself, your work, even the world around you, and it just feels wrong, like things should be connected, but they're not.
Right, like something's off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to really get a grip on this idea of alienation, and we're going to use this awesome entry on, well, it's called Alienation in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as our guide.
Yeah, that's our main source for this one.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, this idea of alienation, it's not just some new agey thing.
Oh, definitely not. Alienation, the term itself, has been around for a while, like way back to the 15th century in English.
Yeah.
And right from the beginning, it had all these different shades of meaning, which is really interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. So, like, what were some of those early meanings?
Well, it could mean being estranged from God, which, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah.
A fundamental kind of separation.
Yeah, a huge rift.
Yeah, exactly. And then it also had this legal meaning, like transferring ownership, making something someone else's, like alienating property.
Ah, so making it other.
Yeah, precisely. But then, and this is maybe the most fascinating part, it was also linked to mental derangement. That's actually where the old term alienist for a psychiatrist comes from.
Wow, I never knew that. So even way back then, alienation was tied to this idea of being, well, kind of off, not quite right in the head.
Right, like there's this core idea of a problematic othering that goes way back in our language and thinking.
It's like this deep human concern with not being whole or connected, like it's been with us for centuries.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just in English either. Rousseau, the French philosopher, he really dug into this in his second discourse with his concept of amour propre, which is basically self-love. But he showed how this self-love could get all twisted, especially with, how society develops. And that could lead to a kind of alienation within ourselves, where we end up acting in ways that, betray who we really are.
Right, so it's not just being separated from something external, but also from our own true selves. It's like an internal split.
Exactly. And this leads us to how the Stanford entry defines alienation philosophically. At its core, it's this messed up separation, this problematic separation between a subject, as you, me, a group of people, and an object. And this object, it doesn't have to be another person. It could be a thing, an idea, a system, even ourselves, like you said. The important thing is that there's this sense that the subject and object belong together, but something's gone wrong.
Yeah, okay, I'm starting to get it. It's like they should be in harmony, but they're not. It's like a plant that's been ripped out of the soil. It needs that connection to thrive.
Perfect analogy. There's that fundamental link that's been broken.
So to recap, we have three key ingredients: the subject, the object, and then this messed up separation between them.
Exactly.
And that separation, it can show up in so many ways, right? Like breakups, feeling isolated or powerless, even just straight up hostility and like domination. These are all signs of alienation, potentially.
Yeah, they can be. It's like all these different symptoms, but they might have this same root cause.
But it's important to remember not every separation is alienation.
Right. That's a really crucial point that the Stanford entry emphasizes. Like, just because you'd rather have pizza than salad doesn't mean you're alienated from salad.
Right.
The separation has to be messing with something deeper, like a fundamental connection or harmony that should be there. It's got to feel like things should be together, but they're not, and that's a problem. Like, something's out of whack.
It's like a disruption of a natural order. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a disruption of how things are supposed to be.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, the entry dives into some related ideas that help us understand alienation even better. And these ideas come from Hegel and Marx mainly. They're called fetishism and objectification.
Yeah, those are key concepts in this whole discussion.
So let's start with fetishism. The entry describes it as like our own creations turning on us. It's like they escape our control, become independent, and then end up dominating us.
Yeah, it's kind of Frankenstein's situation, right?
Right.
The monster you created now controls you.
Totally. So what are some examples of fetishism?
Well, Feuerbach, he had this really interesting analysis of religion. He said that we basically take all our best qualities, like love, compassion, creativity, and we project them onto this divine being.
Okay, we create God in our image.
Exactly. And then get this, we end up worshiping that projection, that image we created. We become enslaved to it. And in the process, we deny our own human needs and potential.
So we create something in our minds, and then it ends up controlling us. That's pretty wild.
It is. And the entry points out that Hegel and Marx applied this idea of fetishism to other things too, like the state and private property.
Ah, yeah, how those things can feel like they have a life of their own, dictating how we live.
Exactly, like market forces.
Yeah, market forces. It's this phrase we throw around all the time, but it really captures that sense of something that's beyond our control, this force that's shaping our lives. It's like we've created this economic system, but now it's ruling us. It's a perfect example of fetishism.
It is. And Marx had this really great quote about this. As, in religion, man is governed by the products of his own brain, so in capitalistic production, he is governed by the products of his own hand.
So, whether it's our religious beliefs or our economic systems, our creations can become these alien forces that control us.
Exactly.
But here's the key point, and the entry makes this really clear. Fetishism is a form of alienation, but it's not the whole story.
Right. It's just one piece of the puzzle.
Like, take alienation from nature, which Marx called the metabolic rift.
Yeah, that's a good example.
It's this feeling of being disconnected from the natural world, which is definitely a problem. But nature isn't something we created that's now dominating us.
Right. And actually, often it's the other way around. We're the ones dominating and exploiting nature.
So, alienation can take different forms. It's not always about this Frankensteinian scenario of our creations turning on us.
Precisely. Which brings us to objectification.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Now, when we talk about objectification in this Hegelian and Marxist context, we're not talking about treating people like objects in that, creepy, disrespectful way.
Right, it's not about that kind of objectification.
It's more about the role of work, of productive activity, in how we relate to and change the natural world. Marx actually used this German term, Vergegenständlichung, which is a mouthful, but it gets at this idea of making something objective, giving it a concrete form through our labor.
So it's about how we actively shape the world around us to meet our needs, to express our abilities. It's about how our work, our labor, leaves a mark on the world.
Exactly. And through that process, both nature and we ourselves are transformed. Like, by working together to shape our environment, nature becomes less other to us, less alien.
We connect with it more deeply.
Yeah. And we as humans, we get to express our potential in this really tangible way. Ideally, this productive activity should be fulfilling. It should be a way to realize our potential, to see ourselves reflected in the world we've helped create.
But Marx argued that not all work is like that, right? He was really critical of how work is organized under capitalism. He made a big distinction between alienated labor and unalienated work.
Exactly. In alienated labor, you're forced to work. You don't have control over what you do or how you do it, and you don't get to develop your skills or creativity.
It's just a means to an end. You're not really expressing yourself or connecting with what you're doing.
Exactly. It's not directed at meeting real human needs in a meaningful way. And the worker, they don't feel any satisfaction or get any recognition for their work.
Right, there's no sense of ownership and pride in what you're doing.
Exactly. Now, unalienated work, on the other hand, this is what Marx envisioned for a communist society. It's freely chosen, it's self-fulfilling, it contributes to the well-being of others, and it's appreciated by others. The entry even mentions this Christian view of work as a necessary evil, which Marx might say gets it all wrong.
Oh, how so?
Well, Marx might argue that the Christian view confuses this natural process of objectification, shaping the world through our labor, with this negative experience of alienation that we have under capitalism.
So objectification itself isn't the problem. It's how it's done, the context, the power dynamics that make it alienating.
Exactly. And again, to show that objectification isn't the same as alienation, the entry gives this example of two sisters, Gillian and Hannah. They're super hostile towards each other, but that hostility, it has nothing to do with their work.
It's purely personal, a family feud or something.
Exactly. Their alienation comes from those personal issues, not from how they're relating to the world through their labor.
Right. So just to sum up, fetishism and objectification, they're important for understanding some aspects of alienation, especially in these Hegelian and Marxist frameworks, but they're not the whole story. Alienation is a much broader thing. It can take different forms.
I agree. It's multifaceted for sure.
Okay, so that brings us to this really helpful distinction between subjective and objective alienation. I think this is key to unpacking how alienation plays out in real life.
It is, yeah. It helps us understand why sometimes people feel alienated even when, objectively, things might seem fine.
Right. So let's start with subjective alienation. This is all about how we feel about this separation, this alienation. It's the feeling of being estranged, lost, like life has no meaning. It's that feeling of not belonging, of not feeling at home in the world.
Yeah, it's that internal experience of feeling alienated.
Yeah.
And like you said, this subjective experience doesn't always line up with the objective situation.
Hegel.
For example, he argued that people in the modern world, they might feel subjectively alienated even if, objectively, the social structures allow for self-realization.
So someone might feel alienated, even though, in theory, they have everything they need to live a good life.
Right. They might have opportunities for meaningful work, for connection with others, but they still feel this sense of emptiness, of disconnect.
So there's this gap between how things are and how they feel.
Exactly. And then there's objective alienation. This is alienation that's defined without any reference to our feelings. It's about how the separation, the alienation, actually prevents us from realizing our potential, from fully developing as human beings.
So it's not about how we feel, it's about the actual conditions that limit us, whether we're aware of them or not.
Precisely. So someone might be stuck in a dead-end job, a job that doesn't challenge them or allow them to use their talents.
They might even feel okay about it.
They might, yeah. They might not even realize they're being held back. But objectively, they're alienated from their full potential.
So the entry gives us this really useful four-part schema to think about these different combinations of subjective and objective alienation. I think it's really helpful for understanding different philosophical takes on society.
It is, yeah. So let's break down those four scenarios. First, you have both objective and subjective alienation present.
This is classic Marx, right?
It is.
No.
It's that picture of alienation under capitalism where the way work and society are structured creates both these objective barriers to fulfilling your potential and that subjective feeling of being powerless and estranged.
Right, like you're trapped in a system that's designed to keep you down, and you feel that trapped.
Exactly. Although, as the entry points out, Marx did acknowledge that even capitalists, they might be objectively alienated by the system in certain ways.
Interesting. How so?
Well, maybe they're forced to compete ruthlessly, or maybe they're driven by profit instead of genuine human needs. So even though they're at the top of the system, they're still alienated from certain aspects of their humanity.
But they might not feel it.
Right? They might be perfectly happy in their alienated state. Which leads us to the second scenario. Objective alienation is present, but subjective alienation is absent.
So this is like you're alienated, but you don't know it.
Yeah, exactly. It's pure objective alienation.
Yes.
And the entry suggests that this might be how some people see advanced capitalism today. Like, individuals are happy, but it's a shallow kind of happiness. They find fulfillment in consumption, in fitting in, and distracting themselves from deeper questions about meaning and purpose.
It's like they've been conditioned to accept their alienation, to not even see it as a problem.
Exactly. Which raises this really disturbing question. If people don't even realize they're alienated, how can we ever hope to change things?
Right, where does the motivation for change come from if people don't feel the need to change?
Exactly.
Okay, then we have the third scenario. Subjective alienation is present, but objective alienation is absent. This is pure subjective alienation, and it's associated with Hegel's perspective.
Right. Hegel believed that the modern world, with all its institutions and structures, actually does provide the framework for self-realization.
So, objectively, the conditions are there for people to live fulfilling lives.
Yeah. But the problem, according to Hegel, is that individuals, they don't fully grasp this. They feel estranged from their own society. They don't see how they fit in or how they can contribute.
So it's a problem of perception, of understanding. The home is there, but people don't recognize it.
Right. And this difference in diagnosis between Marx and Hegel, it helps explain why they had such different political views. Marx, he saw these objective barriers that needed to be overthrown through revolution.
While Hegel thought the solution was more about changing people's attitudes and understanding, helping them see the world differently.
Exactly. Then we have the fourth scenario.
Okay.
Neither subjective nor objective alienation is present.
So this is like the ideal state.
It is, yeah. It's what both Hegel and Marx, in their own ways, were striving for. It's a state of true integration, where individuals can fully realize their potential and feel deeply connected to their community and the world around them.
It's like utopia, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Although the entry does point out that someone defending the status quo might also say, hey, we're already there, everything's fine.
Right. They might try to deny that any alienation exists.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a really helpful framework for understanding these different perspectives on alienation and how it plays out in society. It shows us that just feeling alienated isn't enough to spark change.
Right. It matters what kind of alienation it is and whether it's actually rooted in objective conditions.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about what alienation is, how it's connected to fetishism and objectification, the difference between subjective and objective alienation. But now we come to a really crucial question. What exactly makes a separation problematic? Like, what's the standard for saying that two things should be connected, that they belong together?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. What's the benchmark for this harmony or connection that alienation disrupts?
Right, like what's the gold standard for being whole or being connected?
Well, the entry points out that historically, the idea of essential human nature has been really important here.
Okay, so the idea is that we have this inherent nature, these core characteristics that make us human.
Right. And if something prevents us from realizing those characteristics, from living in accordance with our nature, that's what makes it a problematic separation. That's what makes it alienation.
I see. So it's like we're alienated if we're not living up to our full potential as human beings.
Exactly. And the entry gives this great hypothetical example to illustrate this. There are these two theorists, Katerina and Laura, and they're discussing this individualistic society. They both agree that alienation happens when we can't fully realize ourselves, but they disagree about what that self actually is.
Ah, so they have different ideas about human nature.
Right. Katerina believes that humans are inherently cooperative and social. So for her, this highly individualistic society where everyone's focused on themselves, that's alienating. It's preventing people from expressing their true social nature.
But Laura doesn't see it that way. She doesn't think cooperation is essential to human nature.
Right. So for her, this individualistic society, it might be totally fine. It might even allow people to flourish in their own way.
So what counts as alienation really depends on your underlying beliefs about human nature. It's all relative.
Exactly. And it suggests that on this view, all forms of alienation, whether it's from other people, from our work, from nature, could ultimately be seen as a separation from our true human nature.
Like we're not being true to ourselves.
Right. But the entry also discusses this alternative perspective developed by Rahel Jaegi. She's coming from this critical theory tradition.
Okay, so how is her approach different?
Well, instead of relying on this potentially controversial idea of a fixed human nature, she focuses on what she calls appropriation.
Appropriation. What does that mean in this context?
It's basically our capacity to determine our own lives, to make choices, and engage in projects that we feel are truly our own. It's about experiencing our lives as self-determined.
So, for Jagi, alienation happens when this ability to appropriate our lives is disrupted. It's when we feel like we're not in control, like our actions and creations don't really belong to us.
Exactly. And she identifies four main ways this can happen.
Okay, lay them on me.
First, there's powerlessness, that feeling of being unable to influence your circumstances, like you're just a cog in a machine.
Right, like you have no agency.
Exactly. Then there's loss of authenticity, which is when you don't identify with the social roles you're expected to play.
Like you're putting on a mask, pretending to be someone you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Third, there's internal division. This is when you feel like your own desires or impulses are somehow alien to you, like part of you is at war with another part.
Ah, that internal conflict.
Right. And finally, there's indifference, which is like a detachment from your own activities, your projects, even from your past self. It's like you're just going through the motions, but you don't really care about any of it.
So Jagi's model, it definitely resonates with this core idea of alienation as a problematic separation. But instead of relying on this fixed notion of human nature, it uses this more fluid concept of freedom as self-determination.
Precisely. And the entry highlights how Jagi's model can be used for immanent critique. It's like we can use our own modern values of freedom and self-determination to identify those places where our society isn't living up to those values. We can pinpoint where alienation is happening based on our own stated ideals.
So we don't need this grand theory of human nature to identify alienation. We can just look at how our society is actually functioning and see where it's failing to meet our own standards of freedom and self-determination.
Exactly. Although the entry does raise some important questions about Jagi's account, like, is the distinction between essentialism and agency really that clear-cut? And what's the philosophical basis for saying that appropriation is good or valuable? And does this focus on individual thoughts and dispositions maybe miss the bigger picture of how social structures create alienation.
Right, so there's still a lot to think about there.
There is, yeah.
Okay, so the entry then shifts gears and talks about the ethical dimension of alienation. And it starts with this pretty straightforward idea. Alienation is bad because it involves a loss of something good, a loss of a proper connection that should exist.
Right, like being separated from something you belong with that's inherently harmful. It just feels
It's
wrong.
like a wound, a rupture in the fabric of being.
Exactly. But then the entry brings up this more subtle and maybe even counterintuitive idea that alienation, it might not be entirely negative. It might actually be a necessary part of achieving something good.
Okay, that's interesting. Explain that one to me.
Well, the entry uses Marx's view of historical development as an example. He saw history as unfolding in this kind of dialectical pattern, a three-stage process. First, you have this pre-capitalist stage, which he described as undifferentiated unity. In this stage, individuals are totally embedded in their communities and social roles. There's not really a strong sense of individual identity.
Right, it's like everyone's just part of the collective.
Exactly. Then you have the rise of capitalism, which Marx calls the stage of differentiated disunity. Here you have this increase in independence, separation between individuals. People start focusing more on themselves, on their own goals and desires.
So this is where alienation comes in.
It is, yeah. There's this loss of that earlier sense of communal connection. But the important point is that this stage also brings about something new and valuable: individuality.
Ah, so even though there's this loss of connection, there's also this gain in terms of individual freedom and self-awareness.
Precisely. And then in the final stage, which Marx envisioned as a communist society, you have differentiated unity.
So it's like the best of both worlds.
Right. You have both a strong sense of community and the flourishing of individual autonomy.
So alienation, that second stage, it's like a necessary step in this historical process. It's painful, there's loss involved, but it's what allows for the development of individuality, which then can be integrated into this new form of community.
Exactly. It's like a growing pain.
Right.
It hurts, but it's part of maturing.
It's a really nuanced way of looking at it. It's not just good or bad, it's more complex than that.
It is. And then the entry takes this even further and suggests that morality itself, or at least certain forms of it, might actually be critiqued from the standpoint of alienation.
Wait, what? How can morality be alienating?
Well, the argument is that some moral frameworks, especially those that emphasize these universal principles and impartiality, they might require us to downplay our personal beliefs and feelings, even our attachments to specific people.
So to be moral, we have to detach ourselves from our personal lives, from our loved ones.
That's the concern, yeah. Like, if we're constantly trying to adopt this view from nowhere, this objective, impartial perspective, it can leave very little room for our close relationships, for the things that make our lives meaningful on a personal level.
It's like in trying to be good in this universal sense, we end up alienating ourselves from the things that matter most to us.
Exactly. And the entry points out that this problem might not apply to all moral theories or all people equally.
Right. Some people might be more comfortable with this kind of detachment.
Right. But it does raise this important question about whether certain moral frameworks might inadvertently lead to a kind of alienation, a separation from those things that give our lives meaning and purpose.
So the concept of alienation, it can help us critically examine our moral beliefs to see if they're actually leading us towards a more fulfilling life or not.
Exactly. It provides a new perspective, a new lens through which to view our ethical commitments.
Okay, so in the final section, the entry gets into the more empirical side of things. It acknowledges that all this philosophical discussion of alienation, it leaves a lot of real-world questions unanswered. Like, how do we actually measure alienation? How widespread is it? Can it be overcome?
Right. Philosophy gives us these great conceptual tools, but at the end of the day, we need to engage with the social sciences, with data, with real-world observations to answer those questions.
So, for example, Marx was very critical of alienated labor under capitalism. But how do we know if he was right?
Exactly. Like, is all work under capitalism necessarily alienating?
Right, for everyone.
And could it be made less alienating without getting rid of capitalism altogether? Those are empirical questions.
They are, yeah. And then there's this question about the historical scope of alienation. Marx argued that alienation was more pervasive and severe under capitalism than in pre-capitalist societies.
Right, but how do we measure that? How do we compare the levels of alienation across different historical periods?
Yeah, like how do we know that people weren't just as miserable working in the fields under feudalism as they are working in factories under capitalism?
Right. And it gets even trickier when you're talking about objective alienation, this gap between people's potential in their actual lives.
Yeah.
How do you measure that across different societies with different values, different ways of life?
Yeah, it seems almost impossible to quantify something like that.
It is very difficult, yeah. And then there's the question of the future. Marx was very optimistic about the possibility of overcoming alienation in a communist society.
Right. He believed that a different kind of society could eliminate alienated labor altogether.
But he was also pretty vague about how that would actually work.
Yeah.
He didn't provide a lot of concrete details about this future communist society.
So there's room for skepticism. Like, can alienation really be overcome completely?
Right.
And even if it can, will it happen? Is that a realistic possibility given human nature and the way societies tend to function? These are big questions that philosophy can't answer on its own.
I agree. It needs to be collaborative effort between philosophy and the social sciences.
Okay, so to wrap things up, you and I have really gone deep on this concept of alienation. We've covered its history, how it's related to other ideas like fetishism and objectification, the different ways it can manifest subjectively and objectively, the challenges of defining what makes a separation problematic, how it connects to our understanding of value and morality, and finally, all these unanswered empirical questions that need further exploration.
We've covered a lot, but I think it's really given us a more nuanced and complete picture of this concept.
Definitely. And for you, our listener, we hope this has given you a deeper understanding of alienation and how it might be playing out in your own life, in your relationships, in your work, and in the world around you.
Absolutely.
And here's a final thought to chew on. Given that alienation can be both negative and maybe even have some positive aspects, like the emergence of individuality, how can understanding this concept give us a more balanced perspective on, societal progress and personal growth?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with.
Yeah. And if you're interested in digging deeper into any of these ideas, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a fantastic resource.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.